Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to discuss community media and social capital. This lecture is part of your paper on community media and society. Community media has the scope to provide voice to neglected and marginalized communities, a perspective that is often ignored by mass media. Its non-hierarchical and participatory processes help in bringing together a plurality of points of view and helps in enhancing civic engagement, which in turn has the potential to lead to social change. In this lecture, we would try to develop a clear understanding of community media. In short, community media is any form of media that is created for the social benefit of marginalized communities through the creation of alternative media space to cover issues that matter in the everyday lives of these communities, a perspective normally missing from mass media, which Buckley in 2011 mentioned it as. UNESCO defines community media as an alternative medium to public and commercial media as well as social media. They are characterized by their accountability to and participation of communities they serve. The main intent behind community media is to be able to provide a platform for the marginalized to create content or programs of their interests, and more broadly to address voice and information poverty. Such collaborative programs that address important issues presented in their own language and culture generate local affinity or a sense of togetherness. Various forms of community media include community newspapers, magazines, community radio, pamphlets or newsletters used by or developed with community members for campaigns or projects, etc. In this lecture, we will primarily focus on one community-based media, that is, community radio. Emphasis will particularly be placed on the potential of using community radio programs in building and strengthening social capital. In order to understand this potential of community radio, let's first delve into the meaning of social capital. Social capital, present form. In the early 90s, many governments and non-governmental organizations began to recognize the value, legitimacy, and effectiveness of community participation in governance and thus began a rigorous focus on participatory development. There was a clear shift towards community-based or driven development and governance. During this period, a concept that gained prominence and renewed interest amongst both academia and practitioners was social capital. Defining social capital is tricky, as there is no clear and commonly agreed upon definition within the field, and it can be observed that there is a plethora of definitions across various disciplines using social capital. Let us look at two conceptualizations that has been important for our purpose and then arrive at a more generalized definition. Robert Putnam, a renowned political scientist in the field of social capital, defined it as those features of social organization such as networks, norms, and social trust that facilitates coordination and cooperation for mutual benefit. Therefore, social capital can be understood as strong social relations or networks based on trust and shared norms that enable collective action and social change. A community that scores high on social capital abide by principles of reciprocity and dialogue. In Putnam's point of view, the more stock of social capital a community possesses, the more it can undertake activities as a collective. In this theory of social capital, trust is central, but he also cautions that thin trust is better than thick trust, as the latter is characteristic of tightly knit and closed communities. Putnam has extensively been criticized for his essentialist and romanticized notion of cohesive civic communities that are based on highly generalized levels of trust. It also lacks any substantiative theorization of the role of power and hierarchical relationships. The next definition explores how trusted social networks can be used to maintain power inequities in the society. According to French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu, social capital is the sum of the resources, actual or virtual, that accrue to an individual or a group by virtue of possessing a durable network of more or less institutionalized relationships of mutual acquaintance and recognition. His work, Distinction, mainly focused on how groups utilize social capital to reproduce deep-rooted inequality within society. To Bourdieu, social capital is stock that is mainly held by elites to propagate inequality and maintain power status quo in their favor. Although Putnam conceptualizes social capital as a neutral term, he largely understood it as a positive resource that's utilized for mutual benefit. On the other hand, Bourdieu's conception of social capital demonstrated how it could be utilized by powerful elites to their advantage. Let us now move to a more generalized definition of social capital. Social connectedness or civic engagement that lays the foundations for socially and culturally cohesive communities. This connectedness is the result of mutual trust, shared norms, and reciprocal help within and between social networks that builds a sense of solidarity. Such mutual trust, reciprocity, and support system further enables them to work as a collective towards achieving community objectives. In short, the basic idea behind the notion of social capital is that social networks based on trust and shared norms leads to social unity and collective action, which aids in improving the standard of living, quality of life, and development. Social capital can be more easily understood if we think of a concrete situation in our lives when we are on a job hunt or expecting a promotion. It is a known fact that our networking skills have a lot to do with being successful in these tasks. That is, as the aphorism goes, it's not what you know, it's who you know. Similarly, if we extrapolate to the community level, the more connected communities, both horizontally and vertically, tend to do better than a community devoid of social capital. Alan Kay mentioned, it's that intangible something that exists between individuals and organizations within a community. Most people can recognize it as being the connections and trusting contact that people make while going about their own daily business. To further break down this term, social capital, capital here refers to a resource that mainly consists of trustworthy social relations and networks. And social refers to the fact that it cannot be viewed in isolation as human capital is understood. It is only through this active participation and community ties that social capital is possible. It is primarily a moral resource or stock or fund that increases and depletes with usage and non-usage respectively. However, it is not a homogeneous resource that's actually created and accessed by all members of a community or all communities within the state. There are three dimensions to social capital that are important to understand. 1. Bonding, 2. Bridging, and 3. Linking. Bonding. Social capital, once developed, binds together individuals and communities. This makes for a powerful group with strong social ties, an inward outlook, and a resilient group identity. Trust, networking, and shared norms in such a social capital exist. However, it's internally focused and therefore might prove difficult for its members to unite with external communities for achieving goals that require collective intergroup effort. Bridging. Social capital is developed when a group is able to collectively network and proactively reach out to other individuals, other groups, and other communities. In such a scenario, a group is able to overcome its ascriptive traits and affiliations to form grids with other communities to achieve common goals. Bonding. Social capital is important to bind the community into an organized unit for social action or change. However, it can also make the group more isolated if it is not carried out with bridging social capital. That is, reaching out to other communities and groups to maintain a healthy balance. Linking. Social capital is the development of ties or networks between underprivileged or disadvantaged communities and influential groups such as government agencies, financial and educational institutions, etc., for the achievement of common goals. In such a scenario, we see an active engagement and dialogue between expert and lay knowledge to produce results. Bonding and bridging social capital was conceptualized by Robert Putnam. However, as we discussed, his theorization lacked any substantive mention of the state, power, or social status. More recent literature inspired by tradition of Bourdieu has identified linking social capital that demonstrates the interconnections between different levels of power or social status. Thus, taking this variable of class and power hierarchies into consideration. To Bourdieu, social capital is stock that is mainly held by elites to propagate inequality and maintain power status quo in their favor. According to Anirudh Krishna, who studied the development of social capital over a span of 7 districts across 61 villages in 5 districts of Rajasthan, social capital alone does not assure social change or development as we envision it, in order to activate social capital in areas where it's weak, an appropriate mediating agency is required. In such a context, community media could be the mediating agency that connects various communities. Potential of community media in building social capital. It is important to understand how community radio programs are developed, as it will aid us in concretely recognizing the potential of the community media in building social capital. Topics of the radio program series are to be chosen based on a community needs assessment and not imposed top down by NGOs or by the radio staff. Once the topic is chosen, a stakeholder mapping is to be carried out to identify relevant stakeholders, which will include community members, public policy experts, and other specialized professionals such as doctors. This is followed by radio program content, which is developed based on field research, focus group discussions, interviews, and surveys with community members and other key stakeholders. Interactive and engaging components are included, such as interactive phone-in programs that encourage discussions and exchange of ideas between various stakeholders and knowledge systems. For example, if the topic chosen after a community needs assessment is water hygiene, relevant stakeholders will include community members, frontline health workers, local general physician, panchayat committee members, drinking water and sanitation department officials at the block and district levels, health department officials, etc. Focus group discussions and interviews with a primary stakeholder or community members will help to narrow down on information, knowledge, and resource gaps amongst them. This will help the station staff to create appropriate content for the program series. Ideally, all the key stakeholders are brought together to discuss the program content design and key messages. However, this is always not possible, and therefore feedback is also taken separately. During the broadcast of the series, a live call-in segment with experts such as doctors, health department officials is added. Access and participation. As we discussed, local community members form the core of any community radio program development that includes content production, management, and broadcasting. Community access and their participation will help in democratizing this media space, and there is continuous dialogue between producers and receivers, unlike the mainstream mass media. Community members, who are the audience of the radio programs, are therefore the protagonists of the media. Empowerment and behavior change are likely consequences of projects or programs when the variable of social capital is factored in, that is, programs in which there is a strong network element and dialogue within the community itself. Community radio can play a key role in building this sense of togetherness amongst the community members while bringing them together to discuss about issues that affect them. In such programs, the interests and needs of community members are taken into account, and this in turn develops a sense of collective understanding, ownership, and responsibility of the social issues. Such a participatory approach would provide community members with strong group identity, thereby giving voice to the voiceless by valuing them as decision makers. By providing community members with a safe space to discuss and debate among issues that matter to them, community radio stations become a community support system or psychosocial scaffolding to build trust, promote reciprocity, and ultimately strengthen bonding social capital. The basic logic is that regular community radio stakeholder meetings or FGDs to discuss and debate matters help build trust and reciprocity, which is foundation to the growth of social capital. We will now discuss a case study that can be considered as one of the best example of an effective community media platform. Sangam is India's first community radio station and India's first all-women radio station. It was set up in the Medak district of Telangana and was launched in 2008. They have been recording their programs since 1998 and using the medium of narrowcasting at public meetings and gatherings. It's a unique experiment that is run by two Dalit women in a district that has lower than 10% of female literacy rate. It has successfully managed to continue uninterrupted service of a 2-hour broadcast to 150 villages in Telangana for the last 9 years. One of the most appealing features is that its social programs are instilled with local culture, colloquialism, folk songs, drama, and solutions to everyday problems. These interesting programs based on their local dialect and slang became a point of connecting with neighbors within the village. Most of the individuals who participate in the radio program are low-income, daily wage earning Dalits. Various Sangams or self-help group members from adjoining villages came together to run the station. The radio station recognized the importance of festivals and folk entertainment in the daily lives of community members and therefore made an effort to collect more than 2,500 folk songs sung by community members. It also has an interactive component to its programs through which listeners can share their views. They have made it a point to meet different sections of the community regularly, and the women members ideate, script, anchor, record, and edit their development programs with consultation with community members. Representation of diverse stakeholders. Collaboration is at the heart of community radio programming framework. Through its practice of stakeholder mapping and collective creation of content, it helps to bring in diverse perspectives and complementary assets. It provides a unique opportunity and safe space in which an intermingling of lay and expert knowledge occurs. A space for collective dialogue and critical thinking is a necessity for any behavior change to occur. A change is not targeted at an individual level, but the interface between the individual and the society. Through the interlinking of relevant stakeholders at various levels for the creation of a program series, community radio stations are actively creating social ties or networks outside of the community. The perspective of the other is taken into account and given its due recognition. Reaching out to various stakeholders outside the community, these radio stations are attempting to create bridging social capital, and by its insistence on the participation of the relevant stakeholders from government departments or other experts, it's aiding in the development of linking social capital. As we discussed, internally focused communities often do not reach out to outsiders, and linking social capital is extremely difficult to achieve considering powerful elite is not willing or interested to engage or empower the poor. Since community radio programs are based on specific thematic areas such as framing, health awareness, etc., bringing the various stakeholders for short periods of time is achievable. The poor generally have a large stock of bonding social capital, as it is this mutual bonding between community that helps them get by in difficult circumstances, particularly in the absence of state resources. However, they are generally lacking in the extensive networks that cuts across communities, that is, bridging social capital required for progress and development. Therefore, the churning of ideas during radio program stakeholder meetings and development of consensus is key to building or strengthening social ties and strong networks internally and externally. The ideal scenario is an intense exchange of ideas and opinions during program development. However, it is often noticed across various community radio stations, particularly those owned by NGOs, that programs are internally designed and disseminated without active involvement of the community. Such an agenda-led program development is widespread and defeats the very purpose of the community radio, in which the component of community and democratic participation loses its value. Now let us summarize. Let us now try to understand and summarize what we have discussed in this lecture. We started this lecture by discussing the importance and relevance of community media and its evolution as an effective tool for voicing the concerns of the marginalized sections of the society. We then moved to social capital and conceptualized it from the perspective of two scholars, Robert Putnam and Pierre Bourdieu. We also looked at different strands and dimensions of social capital. We discussed the potential of community media in building social capital. We also discussed the importance of the access and participation, and how representation of diverse stakeholders is a necessity for building an inclusive and effective. The case study of Sangam, India's first community radio station and Asia's first all-women radio station, was also discussed. Do attempt the questions in the self-evaluate quadrant. For further reading suggestions, please refer to the third quadrant. Thank you.